Prakriya 7, the background, where all experiences arise, abide, and subside. After the Sat, Chit, and Ananda aspects have been examined, the next Prakriya investigates the changeless background of all change and difference. As the world appears to anyone, it is shown in seeming pictures, physical and sensual and mental. These are pictures that have been created by changing acts of perception and conception through our bodies and our minds. As our minds and bodies differ, so too their acts of picturing get to be differed as well. The differences produce a great variety of pictures, at different times and places, and in different cultures and personalities. But in the end, each picture must arise from the same complete reality of physical and mental world, which includes all times and places, together with all cultures and all personalities. Whatever picture may appear, of anything or to anyone, that complete reality is always implied in the background of the picturing. Each apparent picture is portrayed at the foreground of experience by some act of picturing. This very act must express the reality from which it has risen. That expressed reality is quietly implied. It stands utterly unpictured in the background, while changing pictures are portrayed on the seeming surface of the mind's attention. Accordingly, reality can be approached as the background screen on which all pictures of the world are drawn. The screen is in itself unpictured, staying everywhere the same, never varying at all. In this sense of standing changeless underneath, that background is called Sat, or existence. But that background is no object in the world. Each object is a pictured element appearing on the background screen, and each such element is lit by consciousness. The knowing light of consciousness is present through all pieces of the picturing. Throughout all varied pieces of the pictured show, that light stays present with the screen. The pictured pieces change and vary, but their background and its knowing light stay present always, throughout all the changes and differences. There is no way of distinguishing between that background reality and its one self-illuminating light of consciousness. The two cannot be told apart. They are, in fact, identical. The background screen is light itself, illuminating all its pictures from behind. The pictures are all made of light. As they show, they shine by that one changeless light, which illuminates itself. In this sense, as self-shining light, the reality is called Chit, or consciousness. As the pictures come and go, they all arise expressing consciousness, from which they come. That expression is their life, which animates their changing movement. From it comes all their sense of purpose and meaning and value. In the end, all pictured acts are done for the sake of consciousness, which they express. As it knows itself in identity, it shines non-dually, identical with the reality of each picture that it lights. By that non-dual shining, all actions in our pictures are inspired to take place, spontaneously and naturally, of their own accord. For that non-dual shining is the happiness that gets uncovered when desire is fulfilled. The wanting mind is dual, feeling need for something else. When what's wanted is obtained, the self that knows is felt to be at one with what has come about. The wanting mind's duality has there come to rest, dissolved in a non-duality that is its real motivation. In this sense, as that which is ultimately valued, the reality is called Ananda, or happiness. The background is thus Sat-chit-ananda. As Sat, it is the background of all objects and objective acts. As Chit, it is the background of all thoughts and ideas, and as Ananda, it is the background of all feelings and all values. But then, how can it be investigated beneath the pictures that appear to cover it? As Sri Atmananda explained, it can be found by looking carefully at the gaps in our picturing of the apparent world. There, in the gaps, when they are properly examined, the background may be found uncovered, shining by itself. In deep sleep, the gap is obvious, because it corresponds to a gap in physical time, seen from the waking state. But there is also a less obvious gap, which need not take any physical time, but which ultimately passes quite unnoticed. This is the gap that keeps taking place in the mind, whenever a perception, thought, or feeling comes to an end. At this point of time, just after each mentation disappears, and just before the next appears, there is a timeless gap in which the mind has returned to dissolution in its shining background. In that gap, as in deep sleep, the ego is dissolved and the real self is found shining in its own glory. Taking note of that gap shows the background positively, as that truth and positive reality of each object and each action that appears. What makes this Prakriya so positive is that the gap can be seen to keep occurring all the time. It occurs before and after every moment, as each present moment rises from the dissolution of what went before, and at this moment, in its turn, dissolves into a timeless shining, out of which the next succeeding moment is then born. Whatever may happen is shown to rise immediately from that shining background, which provides both knowing light and continuing support. And with just the same immediacy, what rises into show is then returned to that same background, which stays present quite unchanged. Through this reflection back, all perceptions, thoughts, and feelings keep pointing to a positive reality, which underlies their fitful appearances and changing mind. They point back to their natural and spontaneous returning to dissolve in that reality, where they keep expiring at every moment that we know. The concept of the background in traditional Advaita. Some indications. First, when speaking of the background in his native Malayalam, Sri Atmananda used the word porul. My dictionaries translate the word as meaning truth, wealth, essence, sum, and substance. Second, Ramana Maharshi often speaks of the background as a screen. For example, in 40 verses on reality, he says, "Names and forms are pictures. The one who sees the light and the screen, all these are one reality, and that alone." Similarly, at an earlier time, Sri Yanashavar says in Kangedeva Pashti, composed in old Marathi Prakrit, "A non-existent picture shows, but what exists is only wall. So too, what shines is consciousness, here in the form of changing world." Third, going back to ancient times, the concept of akasha is often used to indicate or to imply a continuing or changeless background. In particular, as the fifth element, akasha is the background continuity pervading all of space and time. And this word akasha has also a deeper meaning shown by its derivation. It comes from the root kash, which means to shine. To this root, the prefix a is added, meaning nearness or immediacy. So more deeply seen, the word akasha indicates an inmost shining found in the background of our space-time pictures. In that deeper meaning, the element akasha shows changeless reality that is identical with knowing self. That meaning is brought out in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad chapter 3 through a persistent questioning of Yajnavalkya by Garaji. Initially, she goes through 5 elements, asking what each one is made of. When she gets back to ask about akasha, he answers cosmologically through various mythical and religious concepts that lead up to the limitless expanse of Brahman. And he refuses to answer beyond that, telling Garaji that her head will fall off if she asks too many questions. But sometime later on, she comes back with a more intelligent way of asking about the underlying nature of akasha. She asks a leading question that brings out the pervading continuity of akasha throughout all space and time, and then goes on to ask what it is that supports that continuity. Only then does Yajnavalkya give a full and direct answer, telling her that akasha shows an unchanging reality which is directly found as knowing self. As he puts it, this, Garaji, is that same changeless principle, which is not known, but is the knower. Other than this, there is no knower. Garaji, it is this very changeless principle that Akashi is woven, warp, and woof. 3:18:11